Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and in the studio with me today is Jim Riley. Welcome back.
Hey, good afternoon.
And with Jim and I is Tina DuPont, who is the founder of the Tea Party of West Michigan. Tina, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hey, I'm excited to have you here, and I've got a whole bunch of things that I want to kick around, but I want to start with Common Core for a minute. We talked about it on the show before. In fact, I think I've had you on a couple times, but even we touched on it then. But where are we at now in the state legislature with Common Core? What's going on that topic?
Well, it is still in committee. It is still as bad as ever, and it needs to die. But until we get it out of committee, and then, well, hopefully it doesn't come out of committee, but if it does, it will go to the whole House, and then on to the Senate.
I have to tell you.
Wait, can I just ask one thing?
Sure.
Could you explain to those folks who don't live the life of politics what the heck Common Core is?
Sure. It is supposedly a state and governors association entity to bring all of the schools across the country in line with each other so that they can better measure each other, measure themselves against each other. There's testing to go along with it, and it's really not good because it's actually coming from the federal government, even though they try to say it's not.
So the idea is that every school in the country essentially will be using, at first grade, for instance, all be using the same educational tools and books and things of that sort?
Well, they say not. They say it's just testing. However, everyone knows that if there's testing, the curriculum has to go along with it, or the kids won't pass the test. So basically, it's curriculum for the whole country at the same time.
So tell me, Tina, what one of the pushbacks I hear when I've been on this. First off, to Jim's point, very few people have an understanding of what Common Core is. That said, those few folks that are out talking about it and trying to promote it, what is the answer? What makes it bad? Other than it's the federal government, and I'm not in necessarily the greatest proponent of a powerful federal government, to say the least, but other than that, how would it negatively affect my grandchildren?
Well, whenever you have something that is controlled by the federal government, and let's be clear, the federal government has no right in our education. It's not constitutional for us to even have a federal Department of Education. However, we do, and they are heavy-handed. They will tell us they'll give us things that we don't want to teach, and we'll have to teach it. And if you control the children of a nation, you can control the nation eventually. So it's very scary. But on top of that, the data mining that goes along with this is really scary. Right now, through Power Schools, everything that's put on the computer, and right now in my kids' school, that's everything, including some of the parent information. All of that is accessible by Pearson, who is one of the biggest textbook manufacturers in the world, actually. And that's just a whole nother issue, is the textbooks that are coming out and some of the stuff that they suggest kids read and all.
That's kind of what I got out of it before when I first started trying to get my head around this concept, is that first it seemed like a really great mechanism for somebody to sell billions and billions of dollars of books, literally, that in many cases say the same thing that the other books did, but they got new covers on them. And of course the taxpayers are the ones picking up that bill, and kudos to the genius that figured out a new way to make himself a billionaire. That said, when I stand back and look at the actual results we're getting, tell me if I'm thinking wrong, because I would like to see a local school board that local citizens elect actually have control over what their children are being taught. And this seems to be another step further to remove citizens, more specifically to remove parents from that equation. And that's what causes me to be repulsed by that concept.
That's absolutely true, and in fact, it's, I think, intentionally so. They say that we can change some of the standards, however the tests won't be changed, so they'll still have to teach to those standards. And in order to get anything changed at all, pulled out of it or anything, it will have to go to DC now, instead of going to even the state Department of Ed or your local school. The local schools will have no control.
No, they won't. And the fascinating part about it is that it suggests that the children living in Seattle, Washington are faced with the same necessary learning foundations that children in Muskegon County are, or children in Grand Haven, or children in Detroit City. And the reality is that all of these folks have different issues and frankly different cultures that are not being recognized by this, which really in truth, if you read it, and I'm not using this word lightly, it's really preparing your students' parents to be global citizens. And I hope you understand what I mean when I say that, because I'm using their words, not mine. Welcome to a global environment. And it goes along with the naivete that, oh, well, the people say, Mike, we're in a global economy now. But that's to suggest that we haven't always been in a global economy. And I say that because the founding fathers and the chuck wagons that went out west and everything else, we've always had a global economy. But to try to change our culture on such a fundamental level because of using these warm and fuzzy words, to me it's a little bit alarming.
Well, let me just jump in here, because I've heard the term. Now I have a little bit of an education as to what it's about. But the fact that we're talking about it, is this something that's a done deal that we're complaining about? Is this something that's coming and we might be able to change? What options do we have? Why are we talking about it?
It's kind of both. The State Board of Educations across the country and this Governors Association that not even every governor is a part of the states, determined this without even having the curriculum in their hands. They had not seen it. It wasn't even written. But they thought it sounded good. You know, they bought the sales pitch they got. So they all agreed to sign on, except for a couple of states. Now we're starting to see what it is, especially parents, and we're starting to balk at it. But now it's an uphill battle because it's already sort of here. I mean, a lot of the schools for 2 years now have been instituting parts of it. And there's also a lot of expense to it because all the testing is on computer, all the computers have to have the same software. Of course, the Gates Foundation and others are making lots of money on that because besides Pearson, Gates is really big in this. Bill and Melinda Gates, those Gates. So they're going to make a whole lot of money. Not that they need any more. I mean, I don't have a problem with people making a lot of money, but on the backs of children to use them as guinea pigs is a really bad idea. But we can reverse it. Right now, our Representative Tom McMillan in the House of Michigan is really fighting it hard. They've already defunded it just to stop it because everybody started catching on to what this was.
All right, so this is something that the states decide, or could an individual school district say, look, we don't need your test. We'll do something else.
They can do a little bit of that. However, I'm not sure how much leeway they have there because you know, money's tied to it. Whenever the federal government does anything, they give you money because that's it's kind of like the noose they wrap it around your neck so that you can't.
Well, so if Tom McMillan, who is, I believe, is he a Republican
yes.
Representative? He is attempting to get us a waiver like the government is so good at giving.
You know, I'm not sure exactly what it will be and how it will come out, but he's just trying to get us pulled out altogether.
Will we lose money? I mean, is that the argument that's being made on some
I
areas?
imagine the money that was attached to it. That's something that we'd have to ask like Melanie Curtis or someone like that. I'm not sure.
Keep in mind, Jim, that this is supposedly not a federal process. It's going state by state. There are some states that have said absolutely not. And by the way, folks, it's not necessarily a Republican or a Democrat issue either, because there's people on both sides of the aisle that are very passionately in favor of it or against it. For instance, Governor Snyder has indicated his support for it. Amanda Price, who's a state representative down in the 89th district, has signaled her support for it. While on the other hand, you've got Tom McMillan that Tina just alluded to, that's very passionately against it. I'm very passionately
against it. Are Democrats as a group for this? Because Democrats, as a party, and certainly we have elected Democrats at both the state House and the state Senate level, do they tend to be for this or against it?
It depends on how much they know. There are actual teachers that call themselves Democrats.
No, I'm talking about elected Democrats.
I don't know. That's a good question because there haven't been enough votes. It hasn't even gotten out of committee, so we don't know where it's at.
Okay.
The legislature had no say whatsoever in this. It was just done by the school boards and the governors.
I will tell you to your question, Jim, that if you look state by state, those states that are passing on it In fact, we've lost Wi-Fi entirely, but those states that are passing on it are the ones that tend to be very conservative states, and the ones that are embracing it tend to be very, very liberal states.
Okay.
So I mean, if you're looking at outside the party line and just look to the ideologies, this is certainly not a conservative or a libertarian position whatsoever.
Well, I am always suspicious of the phrase, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." But anybody who reads the MEP scores, certainly in West Michigan, knows that our schools are a disaster. I mean, forget the fiscal disaster, forget the ridiculous tenure rules and the fact that the schools are spending money that they don't have and making promises to their employees that they cannot keep. But just the product of our school system, the ability to universally, and these are things that are universal throughout our country, where children ought to be taught how to read, how to write cogent paragraphs, and how to do reasonable arithmetic and have some sense of history. We know that isn't working today. How do you answer someone who says, look, here's something new, trying to address these ills. You folks are just against it, fair enough. What's your answer? Because right now, the system clearly isn't working for anybody.
Well, but there's a couple of things that I learned last weekend, as a matter of fact, about Common Core that are so much worse than what we have now. For instance, they are going down into first, second, and third grades and teaching them things they taught them in later grades, where children aren't even capable of handling the processes they're talking about.
And this is the test that would be testing for these things, the federally administered
the curriculum to go with the tests that the kids will have to pass. And the problem is again, the money's tied to it. It's a way they think to tell who are the bad teachers, who are the good teachers, bad schools, good schools, that kind of stuff. So there will be some stick involved here. And another thing that they've done is taken, I believe it's Algebra 2 completely out, or maybe that's where they stop. So the kids aren't even prepared. If they want to go into an engineering school, they're going to have to take some remedial math or high school level math to get in before they can start their engineering studies in a college.
You know what's fascinating about the whole concept, if you step back away from getting into the nuts and the bolts of it, is that if you look at the trend results of school in general, public education, and you follow their line straight downhill from those folks born 1960, 62-ish through current, each year it goes down. Each year that we've further embraced national control versus local control, we've lost a little bit more actual education results. So skip all the ideology and the big government, little government, move away from that and say, what are we getting for just, let's look at the results. Each year it's worse. And the answer each year is, then we need to have more government and control. And I pause, I say, wait a minute, what are we thinking when what we see as a result makes it worse, and their answer is, let's double down on it and make it even more worse.
That's what's happening.
That's really what's happening in
Yeah,
my
that
mind.
really
Well,
is.
and as you mentioned too, once you start looking at the specific curriculum, once you look at what is being tested and what is actually being brought in front of the students, then it's stomach turning. Do you happen to have, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but do you happen to have any other specifics about things that they are being taught that parents might say, oh my gosh, I don't want my kid taught that?
A lot of the classic reading is gone. They're still in the suggested list, but so are a lot of new books that are, one in particular that was already being used in California is very sexually explicit, and the teacher that was using that one, it's in the list of suggested books to read in Common Core. She was having these students read these things out loud, and I wouldn't read it over the radio right now. It was bad. And so the problem is, what can sneak into here? We don't know anything, and they've taken out real classics.
Yeah, the irony to it when you drill down like that is that one of the complaints that folks like myself have, and I believe you also do, Jim, is that we've moved away from reading, writing, and arithmetic. The fundamental learning blocks that to me allow a person to have some cognitive thinking and to be able to actually benefit from higher education or go on to a successful career. We've moved away from that. The Common Core takes us even further from that. It removes our young a little bit further from practical math. It removes them a little bit further from fundamental reading skills. And it's more of the, to use the old term, the last time they were selling us a bill of goods, it moves us more they're doubling down on the rounded education concept. And as I used to quip, rounded education is the hole in the middle they've left. It used to be the reading, writing, and arithmetic that people don't have anymore. I don't know what kind of society we'll have if we've stripped ourselves of family in most quarters of the United States to a great degree, and we've watered down education to the point where we're vastly more worried about a rounded education being a global citizen than we are being able to do fundamental basic math.
Here's a couple more things. For instance, they're going to stop teaching cursive. Now, what do you know about our Constitution?
Cursive writing, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
That is going to, these kids aren't going to be able to read those documents. Our historical documents of our country, they're not even going to be able to read them.
But an argument could be made, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, but an argument could be made that cursive is not something that is current. You're not going to be presenting any business proposals or any type of communication that requires cursive. And instead of teaching cursive, we're going to teach X that's going to be time better spent. Has that argument been made? Or are they just going to take a break and exercise and eat zucchini?
You know what, speaking of break, we're going to transition to a break, and folks, we will be right back in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. I'm Mike Hewitt. I'm in with Jim Riley today.
I'm here.
And Tina DuPont of
Hello.
the Tea Party of West Michigan. Hey, when we left off to break, we were talking about Common Core. If we can, let's finish up on that one a little bit, and then we'll move on. But
can I just prompt my question, because I didn't want to leave it there? Have they come up with the answer to my question? You know, which said, hey, they're not going to teach cursive, for instance. What is it that they are going to teach? Then maybe they're not going to do algebra 2. They're not going to teach cursive. What additional education will be imparted from the teachers to our children with all this free time?
Well, I know for one thing, in this state, they have gone back to 2 years of a language.
Oh, well, that's good.
It's good, but I don't know that it's necessary. It can be learned after school in many different night classes and things like that. I mean, some of these kids are going to work in an American factory all their lives. Do they really need to know French?
I got to tell you on that point for both of you,
that may be true.
One of the things I'd push back on a little bit, Jim, is that whether you and I agree with the individual choices on this curriculum or not, it isn't up to the government. It's up to the parents, and that's the part I don't want to lose track of.
Oh, that's the ultimate point. Yes.
One of the things a society does, and I brought this today because I wanted to talk about for just a brief second what's real. And one of the things that we're getting out of our evolving society is a whole bunch of nothing. Everything's temporary, and it's all in the state of transition. We've got paper money that frankly doesn't mean a fraction of what it did even a decade ago. And when the parents aren't in control of raising their own children and making these kind of fundamental, really basic decisions, folks, our train's going the wrong way on this tracks. That's really what I can't imagine thinking anything different than the parents that should be making these decisions.
Absolutely, parents should. Parents know their child more than anyone else. Parents know where their aptitudes lie, and my oldest is going to go to engineering school, and he's taking a Spanish this year in his senior year. He's in with a bunch of freshmen because they've changed all this stuff around. He doesn't need that. He's a straight A student. He's already been accepted into a college for engineering. So to take a Spanish class is just a waste of a quarter for him.
Well, to me, it's a fascinating thing that these lofty socialists and their friends on the right that I identify as do-gooders, these folks truly think that parents are not qualified to make decisions for their children.
Very conceited.
And I am just grossly insulted by that approach to what should be the American family and individualism.
Well, then what can we do to stop this?
Tell them no.
Yeah,
Tell who no?
Your House and Senate in Michigan.
Okay, so the way to stop it at this point in Michigan is to contact, in our case, we have 2 state representatives and we have a state senator. That would be to focus your time on picking up the phone and contacting Colleen Lamati, Marcia Hovey Wright, or Republican Senator Jeff Hansen.
Yeah, in this district.
In this district.
Wow, is that a classic example of votes matter? Because every one of those people you just listed are going to be supporting this do-gooder, nonsensical government.
Well, 2 of them, the reps are Democrats, and Jeff Hansen is a Republican. The 3 of them are all for this, as far as you know?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I do want to make one more point. There was a team looking at this whole thing as it was going along and determining whether it was good or not. Two people on it, Sandra Stotsky and James Milgram, were the only two who were actually experts in their fields, one in math, one in English. The rest were all educated as teachers. These two wouldn't sign off on it. It was so bad in their fields that they would not even sign off on it. And now they're out testifying.
And they only
it.
had two of the group that were specific, that had specific knowledge.
The rest were like math teachers.
Yeah.
They were trained being a teacher first.
Yes.
You know.
Which
So,
is
yeah.
important to have their input, but to have mathematicians, or at least people who are fully understanding the nuances of math, interesting.
Yeah, so those are the people, but there's also a website, Truth in American Education, that if you want to know anything about it, they have a lot of information.
Okay, Truth, TRUTHANMERICAN, education.
Yeah.
So frustrating that he's got the Wi-Fi signal and I don't.
This is my third computer here because the signal has been a little goofy, but there it is, Truth in American Education, all one word.com. You can Google it, as will I, and I'm going to actually go there and put it on my MuskegonPundit.com blog right now.
And
So
about
you
half
can
of the
go there.
states are actually fighting it right now. 4 have decided not to even use it.
And they wouldn't be fighting it if they had not examined it and found it to be worthy of a struggle. So I think in that sense, again, you don't have to necessarily understand all the details of a particular issue. You can kind of look at who's supporting it and who is not supporting it, and at least get an indication of where you might stand.
The parents that think that they're more qualified to make the basic fundamental decisions for their children are the ones that are fighting it, and those parents that think the government knows better, they're the ones that are on board with it. But folks, if we can, let's transition a little bit. I'd like to talk today about what our state government is referring to, the Michigan Amazon internet tax. Tina, you kind of act as a citizen lobbyist. Have you had any contact with that topic while you're in Lansing?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we accidentally ended up in a committee meeting that this was brought up in, and it's really just another gift to big corporation over and above the little guy, because companies like Amazon around the country will have no problem having the software that's needed to determine the sales tax within each state when someone buys a product in Michigan, for instance. And some states, even like I know Ohio, I'm pretty sure Ohio's one, they even have different sales taxes within the state. And so for a company like Amazon, they're going to need a software that pinpoints where that person lives to what tax rate they're going to pay, and then they're going to have to charge that customer. The little guys can't do that. They can't do that.
What's fascinating about it is that it's billed or promoted as or sponsored as something that's supposed to protect Main Street business. And the irony to that is that Renegade River is a Main Street business. Literally, we're located on the main street in Spring Lake. And they call it an Amazon tax, which I also find personally insulting, given that I'm an author and most of my book sales are taking place on Amazon.com. So as an author and a business person, I'm trying to figure out how in the world these pinheads actually think this is going to benefit my book sales or my business, which is a small business in downtown Michigan. That's how I see it. And I look at it, the sales pitch is that somehow it's going to even the playing field. That's the term that they use. And I'm thinking, how are you evening the playing field by turning on another faucet for me to bring you revenue? I truly don't get it. If you're a person sitting at home on the internet one night and you're making a decision of where to buy like a tent for a coming trip, or maybe one of those in-the-house tents for your children, that's the kind of stuff I sell. You make a decision, you're in Michigan, you say, okay, I can buy it from RenegadeRiver.com, and they're going to charge me sales tax, or I can buy it from some far-flung state somewhere else that doesn't do these kind of silly things. And where are you going to buy it? You're going to buy it from somewhere else. And yet there are pinheads in Lansing that think this is a good idea. I'll be darned if I understand that.
Well, anytime the government does something to fix things, it actually hurts people because they're not taking away the sales tax on the local businesses. They're adding the sales tax.
There's the bingo right there.
So
if
they're
there
gonna
was
make a lot
real
of money.
interest in leveling the playing field, rather than adding a significant burden to Americans who are buying things through the internet, which, by the way, employs any number of people in terms of delivery and all sorts of other things. But aside from that, they could level the playing field from this onerous competition by removing the sales tax. But what is the answer of the ruling class always? No, let's increase taxes on somebody else. That, of course, that the citizens of the state of Michigan will have to pay.
And the irony is, it reminds me of the old cliche: we don't have a tax problem, we have a spending problem. You know, and
it isn't a cliche.
No, and to Tina's point, you know, they're fixing a problem that they created by wanting to spend more. And my answer is to stop spending more and get rid of all of these silly nuisance taxes that cause, as a matter of fact, will cause Michigan citizens to shop in other states. That's just what they're going to do. And I mean, I look at the Republicans, by the way, keeping in mind, folks, I am a Republican, and I look at fellow Republicans that are promoting this, and it leaves me dumbfounded. What are you thinking?
Well, to me, this is the real key, and Tina, I'm really interested in your take on this, but this increase in a tax is something that you would expect from the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party, at least in many things, is quite open and honest. They tell us that we believe in big government, we believe in bigger government, we believe in higher taxes, we believe in expansion at every level of government intrusion. Okay, fair enough. Republicans, on the other hand, tell us we don't believe in any of those things. We believe in lower taxes. We believe in less government intrusion. And yet here in the state of Michigan, with a Republican governor, Republican-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate, this thing has just flown right in here. What's up with the Republicans in the state of Michigan?
Oh, do we have a Republican governor?
Well, they tell us we do.
I didn't realize. That's exactly why the Tea Parties are so up in arms, because what we have been told is the platform of the Republican Party is not what they think it is, because they don't follow it. They're all about crony capitalism, and I shouldn't say they as in all of them, because there are a handful of really good people over there who are.
But apparently enough of them are siding with the Democrats and
Definitely.
the SEIU unions and all of the hardcore leftists to pass any number of things that are clearly and cleanly Democrat issues.
If you use Snydercade as
there we go, another one right there.
Yeah, but if you use Snydercade as a measure, about a third of the elected Republicans in our state legislature are not limited government, fiscal conservative, people representing good stewardship in our state capital. That's not who they are at all.
And by Snydercade, you mean the expansion of Medicaid,
Medicaid explosion.
In the state of Michigan.
Medicaid explosion.
And a huge explosion.
Those are the folks that stood there and said, yes, it's a good idea to cause the health care costs of every citizen in the state of Michigan to go up so that we can gift some people with health care, and hopefully we'll get some votes out of them. It's a fascinating thing. And if you go to Facebook and you're looking at all these state representatives and state senators that supported Medicaid explosion, by the way, it's the same thing as we're dealing with the Amazon tax. They'll have compliments of constituents, and you go, wow, there really are people that support this. Until you start looking at who the people are that are saying, good job, thanks for your work. And then you'll start finding the Michigan Dental Association. Oh, there's a whole big group of lobbyists, is what they are. And I don't want to pick on just the Dental Association, because all of them have glommed onto it and they're clapping like penguins with excitement because they're going to make more dough. But citizens, the dough that they're going to make that they're all excited about, it's your dough. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Definitely.
And these folks are saying the Amazon tax is going to help small business. It's not, first off, it's not going to help my small business, but again, listeners, they're talking about your money. Forget getting trapped in the class warfare of who owns a business and who doesn't, who's done it. It's your money that these so-called Republicans think would be a good idea. And then recently I heard the argument, well, Mike, there's already a user tax that you're supposed to be charging. So we're only trying to clarify the law that's already on the books. And I think, wait a minute, so what you're telling me, elected Republicans and Democrats, what you're telling me is that here's this erroneous tax and rather than seeking to eliminate it and therefore making Michigan more competitive, you've just found a way to double down on it and stick it in our face. That's really what they're doing.
Yeah, and you notice they're not getting rid of any other taxes. They're not getting rid of the road tax. In fact, they still want more tax on gas and on all the things that Snyder keeps coming up with. If they're going to get this extra money, I mean, they're even talking about red light cameras. Let's, talk about confiscation of wealth. It's just amazing what they're doing.
Now, when you say they, you mean the Republicans in the state of Michigan are talking about instituting red light cameras?
Yes.
The Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my golly!
Because they're in control. It has to be the Republicans. If it's not going anywhere,
you keep in mind that the party of majority is the one that sees what bills are going to be voted on. Okay, that's just the reality of it. So when you look to say, okay, senior citizens got whacked. Now they're looking for a way to glom a little bit more dough from the people that do business with small businesses. Not small businesses, folks. The people that do business with small businesses, they're looking to whack them. All the way down the road. And by the way, let's if we can transition a little bit before we go to a break. One of the things I want to make sure we're talking about today is part-time legislature. I happen to be a very big proponent of that. I believe that if we had a part-time legislature, like most of the states in the union, we'd have a lot less of these nonsensical opportunities for the government to glom more liberty and power from us.
I agree with that, and I think getting rid of term limits, or at least making them a lot longer than they are, would also be helpful because, believe it or not, they hurt us. When these guys get close to their term limit, they do horrible things to us, and that's what we're seeing right now in the Senate. A lot of them are termed. They don't care anymore. They're looking for their next big job, which could be with one of these lobbying firms, or could be someone the lobbying firm works for. So they're looking to give out these gifts to these companies so they can have a nice cushy job on the outside where they probably don't do much of anything.
Yeah, that's an interesting result of term limits, because I up until I just heard what you said, I was a supporter of term limits.
Not me.
That's a pretty significant downside. You're right, because because of the term limits, working in the state legislature isn't a lifetime job. At some point, you are term limited out, and you'll have to get a real job.
Sure.
And the easiest way to transition would be to cut some really nifty deals with some of those lobbyists for some of the big corporations. Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I think term limits is a great concept, but it doesn't work. Two things happen. First off, exactly, Tina is spot on with her point, and you can follow up a little bit with the folks like Richardville, our current Speaker of the House of Michigan, and the various other people that have been term limited. You watch and see where they end up next year as a career. You watch it; they're going to be in the health industry up to their ears, because that's what what they did. The other thing is that. What we are also getting from term limits is an empowerment of bureaucrats, because you get a person that's serving in the State House of Representatives, so they get 3 2-year terms. They spend 50% of their time campaigning to maintain their chair, and so they never actually become a statesperson or a legislator or a pro. So they're perpetually going to the room filled with bureaucrats to say, I really would like to do this, tell me how to do it. Well, what you're in effect doing is you're going to a group of state employees saying, can you tell me how to further empower state employees? That's the act of going to them.
Well, okay, how do we, okay, we're talking about a part-time legislature, for instance, and term limits are a different issue, because I believe term limits were voted upon by the voters in the state. But how would we change from this fairly well-compensated legislature to a part-time legislature? How does that happen?
Well, that's going to be very difficult because obviously they don't want to be part-time.
Well, true. We'd have to take power, but in which way? Is it constitutional, or can we just take a vote on it? How do we do it?
I think it's constitutional, but we're going to transition to a break, folks. If you would, join us a little bit, and we're going to talk about some part-time state legislatures in other places in America and see how they did it. Welcome back to the Renegade River Show. I'm Mike Hewitt, in with Jim Riley today. And Tina DuPont, who is of the Tea Party of West Michigan, is in with us. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hey, we were kind of talking about part-time legislators, but let me briefly touch on one of the answers. Well, I guess let me stay there. I got 2 different things I wanted to touch on, and not enough time. Texas is way bigger than the state of Michigan, and I think that they go into legislative, they gather as a legislative body for 90 days a year. And they say, the folks locally who are against this will say, well, that gives the governor too much power. And the irony to it is that the governor of Texas has one of the least powerful governorships in the union. And you know what, Texas is doing a pretty doggone good job. They're competitive economically. their per capita income is higher, their unemployment is lower. I'm not sure I see a downside to any of what they're doing, and I wonder why we're emulating those states that are failing, like Pennsylvania, in terms of big government regulation and tax, which is the byproduct of a full-time legislature.
Well, a governor legally can't do everything through executive order, which is what they're afraid, I guess, that Governor Snyder or whoever would be the governor of Michigan would do. But any law has to be passed by the legislature. So, anything the governor does while they're not in session, it would be wrong. It couldn't happen. It shouldn't be able to happen.
Somebody on Facebook had said that they wouldn't have time to be in parades and to join in various other activities outside of the legislative body, and I thought, well, first off, those should be volunteer activities. I'm certainly not in a hurry to trade my liberty or my treasury so that they can ride around in a parade car.
Well, think about this. What if they actually had jobs, real jobs? They'd get what the rest of us are going through.
That's what the founders had in mind.
That's exactly what they had in mind.
Yeah. So tell me, before we run out of time today, Tina, you're doing a campaign right now, as I understand it, regarding Obamacare.
Yes.
Please bring us up. Tell the listeners what we're doing.
Well, we have fought Obamacare since the beginning of the Tea Parties. That's really what got most of us going, was Obamacare. We knew it was coming. We saw it. We remembered Hillary Care, most of us. But we've tried to strangle it, and it is working. A lot of people say it's not, but I frankly think that it will die on the vine if we can keep up the pressure. And one of the ways to do that is this campaign called Refuse to Enroll, which is to try to convince Americans to not enroll in the exchanges. In Michigan, we don't have a state exchange, and we don't have that weird conglomeration. They call it a partnership exchange between the state and the feds. We will have a straight-out federal exchange. And because of that, our companies are supposed to not be able to be fined for not putting their people into these insurance policies. And Oklahoma right now is going through a lawsuit because the IRS tried to say we are going to fine you and we are going to force you to do that. But the law is not written that way. So that's why we fought so hard not to have our own exchange here and to force the feds to do it. They're not ready. They're not going to get ready, I don't think, because it's almost like they threw this out there and they said, okay, you states do it and we'll let you deal with all the hassle. So they weren't really prepared for all these states, about I think more than half, that refused to write an exchange. So what we're hoping to continue to add to that confusion and that just total mess that Obamacare is, by actually convincing people not to enroll, calling it refuse to enroll. And because the reason we have to do this is because they are going door to door to sign people up. We're trying to convince especially the young people. They're the targets of this whole thing. And those guys, they need to wake up. If you have a teen or a 20-something in your family, you need to tell them this is targeted at them. Because the only way to support this huge bureaucratic nightmare is to have young, healthy people paying for it. And they are going to pay and pay dearly.
What happens, though, if you're a young person and you listen to Tina on the radio and you don't sign up? Isn't there a penalty or downside to it?
Well, they can have, as long as they have an insurance that works, and I have this frequently asked questions thing. For instance, is it illegal to, or is it legal to refuse? You can refuse. It is not a mandate. Obamacare requires most people to have insurance, but they are free to obtain it either privately or through the exchange.
Okay, so one way or another, you have to get insurance. You just refuse to take the government exchange.
Right. We're calling this Medicaid for the middle class because we're all going to be on Medicaid.
What would it cost a young person, let's say a 25-year-old, healthy, to take advantage of this exchange? What would their cost be?
You know, that's a good question. I don't even think the federal government has that answer yet.
Well, isn't it kick in for them on October 1st?
Yeah, they're not ready.
In 15 days?
They're clueless. They're
16
absolutely
days.
clueless, and that's why this is just a travesty.
Let me tell you the worst part about this travesty, not to continue to beat up on a third of the elected Republicans, but there's a word in politics that's called squishy. And we've got a whole bunch of elected Republicans here in the state of Michigan, including Snyder clearly, that are going very, very squishy on this topic. And you know, when we heard during the last presidential campaign that Romney had put forward his own version of what they referred to jokingly as Romney Care, the reality of it is that the establishment wing of the Republican Party really likes this, and that's just the truth of it. But what the listeners need to know is we're not arguing about whether someone ought to have access to affordable health care, because the reality of the Affordable Care Act is that it will not work. They know it won't work, and their end result goal is to introduce you to literally, don't think I'm being shrill, but to a Soviet-styled single-payer healthcare program, one that you will be a part of if you're a citizen here. If you think I'm fooling you, if you think I'm being dynamic or shrill, you need to look at the history of healthcare in America and then compare it to what took place in the Soviet Union.
Well, there are YouTube videos of the president when he was a senator saying that that was his ultimate goal anyway.
It is their ultimate goal. Many senators, many Democrat senators in D.C. have said things exactly like that.
Yeah, they're not hiding it.
No,
they're proud of it.
They're not hiding it. And to your point all along, Jim, you and I really agree on this. The Democrats that are advocating it are not hiding it, and we don't agree, but I respect the fact that they're being honest about it. But these squishy Republicans that are going, no, I'm with you on this, and then they go and they do things and they cause things, or they don't take a legitimate action that they're empowered to take to represent our position on it. I'm absolutely appalled by that type of politics.
As am I.
The D.C. House Republicans, the federal Republicans, need to unfund this thing, and they need to drop it in the president's lap. This business of saying that the government will shut down and it will be blamed on the Republicans need to get their message together and explain that if they defund it and still fund the rest of government, which is their plan, they aren't shutting the government down. If Obama refuses it, they're the ones shutting it down, or the Senate refuses it. So they need to unfund it. They campaigned on it for 4 years now. They've campaigned on it, and yet when it comes down to it, the leadership in the Republican Party in D.C. will not do it. But there are answers to this whole problem of health care, and that is catastrophic coverage and health savings accounts. That really, most Americans can get by on that.
I have a $2,500 deductible, and I pay, and I'm elderly, I'm in my mid-60s. When I got this about 5-6 years ago, I had 3 pre-existing conditions, and my monthly payment was $197 a month. So it was very affordable then. Now it's gone up by 50% because of all the requirements of Obamacare. But catastrophic health care, in my case a $2,500 deductible, which is wonderful for young people, actually maybe a $5,000 deductible would be even better, is very affordable.
How are you able to do that without Comrade Pelosi's help, Jim?
Well, that's the point. They're being lied to that health insurance is so expensive. It is if you continue to, if you do it like having car insurance that pays for your oil changes. But if in fact you're expected to pay for your normal things, your normal doctor visits and things of that sort, but it does protect you if you have a very serious illness. Well,
I got to tell you,
I
on the affordable part, and certainly we've touched on this before, but it's really a frustrating thing with me. It is equivalent, as you've heard me say before, Jim, it is equivalent to walking into a Ford store and saying, how much for the old Focus, and them saying it's $3 million, and you say, wow, that sounds like a lot, and them saying, what do you care, you're not paying for it.
Yes.
And I tell you that because as long as the American public, the electorate, citizens, listeners, I'm talking to you, as long as we as a group do not shop for health care and just allow them to sell us $9 Motrin tablets in an overnight stay, the insurance nor Obamacare, neither one of them care. If you're willing to pay $9 for a Motrin tablet, they don't care. They're just going to raise your premiums or reduce the coverage you get. It's just math to them. They're passing it back to you.
Third-party payer is death to anything.
Well, wait till you see a first-party payer. It collapsed the Soviet economy.
Yeah, but there's also another option that works, and that's there are a lot of doctors out there actually taking cash payments for service, and that is really a great thing to happen. It's called concierge in some places. Many states have them, and it's great. You get much better care. You have the same doctor all the time. You're not in some big conglomerate that's attached to a hospital. It's just wonderful, and I hope to see that more of those popping up around Michigan.
There was one in, I think it's Oklahoma City, where a group of surgeons had and I tried to Google it real quick, but I don't have enough time. There's a surgical hospital there, for lack of better words. It's small, but they're all surgeons. They don't take insurance, and their fees are significantly less.
Much less.
Because
Is
they're
it
not.
Atlas?
Yes.
Atlas Medical?
Exactly, thank you. Because they're not dealing with the bureaucracy and all of the hoops that all of the rest of these programs are causing. Does that, okay, now.
Yeah, it's great.
We're down to a final 2 minutes. I want to touch on one thing that is a slightly different direction. It goes along with part-time legislatures. When I look at what's going on in Lansing, I think we've got a significant problem. And with that in mind, I have been pushing pretty hard to bring together a group of people, a group of citizens, for lack of better words, that will help take on state legislators that are not doing what they campaigned on. So folks that ran as a conservative, a fiscal conservative, forget ideology about social, forget all those other issues. You have a state representative or a state senator that said, I'm going to go represent you in Lansing and I'm a fiscal conservative. I will be a good steward of your trust. And then they get there and they vote for Snyder-Cade. They vote for the Michigan Amazon tax coming up. They vote for all of these silly things that are absolutely categorically opposite of what they campaigned on. I'm saying those folks need to be primaried. They need to be taken on. What say you two?
I agree. I think primary, or if they happen to be in a close Democrat-Republican area, throw an independent in there to run against them just to take the Republican out. We need to teach them a lesson.
If we don't stand tall, the Rhino Republicans will understand they can get away with anything. We need to make our voice heard.
That's how I see it. Folks, we're going to be back next week at the same time, high noon on Sunday. In the meantime, you can find this show on YouTube probably after late tonight or tomorrow. You can like the show on Facebook, and I can't wait to talk to you next Sunday. Brenda Brown, I'll talk to you in a little bit. Have a good day. Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and in the studio with me today is Jim Riley. Welcome back.
Hey, good afternoon.
And with Jim and I is Tina DuPont, who is the founder of the Tea Party of West Michigan. Tina, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hey, I'm excited to have you here, and I've got a whole bunch of things that I want to kick around, but I want to start with Common Core for a minute. We've talked about it on the show before. In fact, I think I've had you on a couple times, but even we touched on it then. But where are we at now in the state legislature with Common Core? What's going on that topic?
Well, it is still in committee. It is still as bad as ever, and it needs to die. But until we get it out of committee, and then, well, hopefully it doesn't come out of committee, but if it does, it will go to the whole House, and then on to the Senate.
I have to tell you.
Wait, can I just ask one thing?
Sure.
Could you explain to those folks who don't live the life of politics what the heck Common Core is?
Sure. It is supposedly a state and governors association entity to bring all of the schools across the country in line with each other so that they can better measure each other, measure themselves against each other. There's testing to go along with it, and it's really not good because it's actually coming from the federal government, even though they try to say it's not.
So the idea is that every school in the country essentially will be using at first grade, for instance, all be using the same educational tools and books and things of that sort?
Well, they say not. They say it's just testing. However, everyone knows that if there's testing, the curriculum has to go along with it, or the kids won't pass the test. So basically, it's curriculum for the whole country at the same time.
So tell me, Tina, what one of the pushbacks I hear when I've been on this, first off, to Jim's point, very few people have and this seems to be another step further to remove citizens, more specifically to remove parents from that equation, and that's what causes me to be repulsed by that concept.
That's absolutely true, and in fact, it's, I think, intentionally so. They say that we can change some of the standards, however the tests won't be changed, so they'll still have to teach to those standards. And in order to get anything changed at all, pulled out of it or anything, it will have to go to DC now, instead of going to even the state Department of Ed or your local school. The local schools will have no control.
No, they won't. And the fascinating part about it is that it suggests that the children living in Seattle, Washington, are faced with the same necessary learning foundations that children in Muskegon County are, or children in Grand Haven, or children in Detroit City. And the reality is that all of these folks have...
That's put on the computer, and right now in my kids' school, that's everything, including some of the parent information. All of that is accessible by Pearson, who is one of the biggest textbook manufacturers in the world, actually. And that's just a whole nother issue, is the textbooks that are coming out and some of the stuff that they suggest kids read and all.
That's kind of what I got out of it before when I first started trying to get my head around this concept, is that first it seemed like a really great mechanism for somebody to sell billions and billions of dollars of books, literally, that in many cases say the same thing that the other books did, but they got new covers on them. And of course the taxpayers are the ones picking up that bill, and kudos to the genius that figured out a new way to make himself a billionaire. That said, when I stand back and look at the actual results we're getting, tell me if I'm thinking wrong, because I would like to see a local school board that local citizens elect actually have control over what their children are being taught, an understanding of what Common Core is. That said, those few folks that are out talking about it and trying to promote it, what is the answer? What makes it bad? Other than it's the federal government, and I'm not in necessarily the greatest proponent of a powerful federal government, to say the least, but other than that, how would it negatively affect my grandchildren?
Well, whenever you have something that is controlled by the federal government, and let's be clear, the federal government has no right in our education. It's not constitutional for us to even have a federal Department of Education. However, we do, and they are heavy-handed. They will tell us they'll give us things that we don't want to teach, and we'll have to teach it. And if you control the children of a nation, you can control the nation eventually. So it's very scary. But on top of that, the data mining that goes along with this is really scary. Right now, through Power Schools, everything